Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We've got for you all our final predictions for the Acolyte. It's been a lot of fun running down our predictions for this show throughout the previous 7 episodes, but we're going to give you guys our thoughts on what we think will happen in episode 8, the finale. Make sure you hit the like button, helps us out so much with the channel, and subscribe for more content just like this. Even though predictions are done for the Acolyte this time around, we will have predictions when Skeleton Crew comes out or when any other show comes out. And we have a variety of other great content on the channel that you might want to check out. Join us for our final live as well, which is going to be on Tuesday, 7 p.m. Pacific, right after the last episode of The Acolyte drops. So make sure you join us there. You can send in your questions. You can chat with us live. It's a lot of fun. We have a great community over there. So if you're watching this and you haven't checked that out, make sure you come and join us on Tuesdays. All right, so to get into episode 8 of The Acolyte, so we kind of have two things to talk about here. Obviously, Sanak, we have episode 7, which was all flashback. It had nothing to do with any present day storyline. It was purely flashback, but this time from the Jedi's perspective of the conflict that we saw go down already in episode 3. So we have that and the ramifications of what happened there in episode 7 to play off of in episode 8. But we also have Osha and Qimir meeting and kind of having this romance and seduction kind of evolve Osha into possibly considering the dark side. And then we have Mae strapped down in the ship by Sol in episode 6. So we have all those things that need to coalesce and combine into a finale that wraps up a variety of major plot lines across the show that, frankly, it doesn't seem like they have enough time to wrap up. What do you think is going to happen in episode 8 of The Acolyte? And what do you think might actually get left for a possible season 2?
I think it's pretty interesting because, like you mentioned, there's a lot of things that have to be wrapped up. There's been some new surprises, some new information that's been introduced in the second half of the flashback of Brendok that only complicate how this finale will go. I'm predicting that it's not going to be much longer than what we got here in this last episode, so I'm not expecting it all to be answered. But I do think what is going to be answered, what's going to happen, it's going to be all centralized around the twins for sure. I think the easiest one to kind of start off with is Mae. Mae, she's been the one that we talk about her characterization a lot, her choices that she's made. She starts off with a pretty strong and narrow focus and then quickly devolves into, oh, I want to care about my sister and abandon everything that I've been taught or been working towards after already killing 2 of these Jedi Master, to being like, oh no, my opportunity's gone here. Now I'm going to swap places with my sister, and tell her that she's brainwashed, all this and that. So she's been the one that's just been inconsistent. She's been the one that's had the weakest characterization by far of anyone in this show. And that is a shame because it's done by Mandela, who I think she's done a much better job with Osha. And I think a lot of the writing supports a lot more intrigue around Osha. So I think what that really means is that this is just going to be a character that is disposable, that's kind of been used throughout the show, especially after the Brendok flashback. It's pretty obvious everyone just uses her as a tool and then disposes of her when she's no longer interesting. She's not necessarily attracting or pulling as much interest in the way that Osha does with Qimir, Osha does with Sol in the flashback. So I figure even though she's going to be brought to the planet by Sol, the only one who would want anything to do with her, the only one who would actually have any purpose for her at this point in the story would be Koril. I would not be surprised if, since we didn't see her body, she's been training or she's been keeping around this vergence that is on Brendok that hopefully we do get to see. She's almost kind of leveled up and then she's trying to take over or like kind of combine her spirit with this artificial half that is Mae, kind of almost making her into just like a final mini villain of sorts, but one that's pretty tragic considering that she has no resolve for herself. Everything that she's believed in, it doesn't really have much weight or value. And I think ultimately that's the best way to use her. If you're not going to give her a real strong arc, you should only continue to make her further and further tragic. I think that's just how things are going to go out with her. And I think Coral's the only one who has any connection to her, and it still is quite bad. So we can see Mae kind of give maybe some perspective of the ruins of Brendok and some of the details that have happened. But after Sol tells her everything's strapped on to the bed here, it's not anything that she necessarily would be surprised by. She's always felt abandoned. She's always been cut off. She's been looking for purpose. Sol telling her that I chose Osha over you because that's what everything was lining up. What you were saying was terrifying me. It'll make her feel worse, but I don't think it's going to necessarily change her arc. So she'll just be susceptible to another power. And I think that power is going to be Koril for sure. When it comes to Osha, yeah, there is that seduction element. And, I think Qimir is successfully manipulating her without necessarily speaking it to existence. It's just a lack of answers, kind of hesitating, kind of letting her fill in the gaps, reading between the lines, even though that's a really all on Osha. And it's definitely going to work here because she's put on this mask of cortosis, right? And this cortosis mask is going to hone down all her senses. It's going to make it sharp and strong. It's going to make the negative parts that Qimir has been saying, like, you got to live with. It's not just a bad thing like the Jedi are telling you. But in the case of someone who's very hurt, has had anguish from her training, from the trauma that we now have a lot clearer of a picture for her, she's going to feel ready to say, like, I'm ready to slip. And I don't think she will immediately, but she's just a step away from that slip. And I think it comes from that confrontation from Sol. And she's going to meet up with Sol. It's going to be like a final chance. Like, this better be like the best explanation, the best reasoning possible. And I think Sol honestly will try to be pretty fair. He's going to be like, these were my mistakes, these were my flaws, but it's too late at this point, right? And Mae can always inform Osha, like, he chose you, he dropped me. And with the situation that she's in now, that might hurt her more. That's like, okay, you forced this destiny on me. This was never a choice like my mother wanted. This is not a choice that I dreamed about or imaged the Jedi to be. You felt so compelled by this destiny that you saw out of me, that you've shaped and ruined my life in so many different ways. So even if Sol has a great answer, I don't think she'll be quite pleased at all. So I think this is where her and Qimir quite literally could team up here, and I would not be surprised if they try to fight Sol. Right, I can definitely see Sol be like, it's either you come with me and surrender or accept what I'm saying, or we'll duke it out. This is the only way for you to have your justice. And I think this could almost be like the noble death that he's looking for, the noble act of a Jedi that he can finally give into. And I think this is like almost a duel that all parties are interested in for different reasons. And I truly believe a duel is going to happen here. And it's just not going to be, oh, because we have to fight. It's because this is what all the circumstances have been leading to. And the opportunity is opening for everybody to just hash it out. This is the best way to do so. I don't know how exactly Mae could become part of this duel. I really don't think she will be. I really do think she's just going to be cast away, kind of cut up and thrown aside after whatever happens with Koril. Again, this is where this finale being so many different pieces, I'm not really sure how to connect it to a duel that I really do see happening between Sol and Osha, and maybe involving Qimir. How does that involve? Is it 2v2 and then sometimes splitting off into different parties or something? I'm not sure, but I think that's how that's gonna go. The only two other things I can really think about, I guess three, would be that there's going to be an alignment of the planets, just like it was in episode 3. I don't know if that strengthens the vergence. I don't know what it's going to do, but I feel like it's going to heighten the emotions, the force powers. I expect this to be pretty visually creative. I feel like it's going to not just play on the emotions of the characters, but it's going to have a lot of weight to the action and the physicality of everything going down. And, I expect to get an answer for the Virgins, especially with some of the answers and some of the hints that Leslie Headland's been giving in articles like on Nerdist, for example. So I expect that to happen. And then I expect Vernestra to see what goes down and hear whatever Sol has to say or is telling to Osha, and then justifying that, or Qimir runs away or is not in that moment there. And we get another classic example of only seeing part of the puzzle, but in this case, for Vernestra, with that Senate oversight, hearing whatever Sol's going to say, seeing all these duels happening, all this conflict happening on Brendok, it's very easy to pin it on him. And I think, unfortunately, that is probably the best case for everybody. It's just going to hurt the Jedi in the long run and leave the Acolyte, whether it be Osha or whether it's actually Qimir, in a great position to then hopefully end with this little cameo, possibly Tenebrous and Plagueis.
Yeah, there's a lot here for this show to do in about 35 minutes, which is what I would guess this episode to be. I know there was a leak in it and wasn't necessarily a highly accredited source, but there was a leak that came out that said the last two episodes were around 42 minutes with credits, and that was right for the last episode. So if we can expect about the same length as episode 7, we don't have much time to wrap up all these storylines. I think this episode does start with Osha. I would guess that it goes immediately to Osha and Qimir's plotline, because you have to get them now to Brendok. And that's the thing, is we can assume Sol's already traveling there because he jumped to light speed somewhere. We don't know where he's going. We can assume he's already going there. This show does show a propensity to teleport characters across the galaxy willy-nilly, where, we see a ship leaving and all of a sudden another ship arrives. Things just happen out of order, it seems, possibly. So if the Osha stuff was to happen technically kind of prior to some of the stuff we saw in episode 6 with Sol and Mae, you could have Osha and Qimir now jumping in to their ship and getting to Brendok to meet up with Mae and Sol eventually by the time they finally get there. I think that a conflict between Mae and Sol is ultimately going to have this ship crash land on Brendok. I think we're going to see the fury in Mae for the first time really in this show. We've been hinting at it in the flashbacks. We haven't really seen her unleashed. I think we see both of the twins really unleashed in this episode, but I do think Mae will be a bit more restrained, but I think she's going to use some of her power, her anger, her fear to fight off Sol a bit in this episode and cause this decrepit ship to now spiral towards the planet's surface. So I think it kind of starts there with those two plot elements, but we have to see some consequences for the reveal. And is the reveal for Osha going to just be that everything we saw in episode 7 was something she meditates into her own mind when she's in the cortosis helmet? I think that's how they have to play it, because I don't really see time for her to find Sol and be like, Sol, what were you going to tell me? And then he has to tell her all over again things we've already seen. I feel like that would be a waste of time in what will probably be an episode that feels like it needs an extra 20 minutes. So if they do that, I think that's a huge mistake. I don't necessarily buy the fact that she sees everything that we saw in episode 7 in her meditation, but I can buy it more than having to sit through another exposition scene where Sol and Osha talk. So I would prefer that to happen and start that way. And I do think you see Osha unleashed after that. I think we've been hinting at the fact that Osha is really restrained. She's not willing to block her mother's attacks. She's not willing to fight for herself, constantly wanting to just be kind of perfect without having to go through the trials and tribulations of it. And she doesn't necessarily believe in her own powers and her own talents. And I think here you're going to see Qimir now push and prod at her to the point where the Sol thing is the final straw. It breaks the camel's back, and you see Osha explode and that fight happen. I'm not completely sold on the idea that Mae will turn good, but what I do think is that Mae's going to try and stop Osha's out of control power. I do think in some ways when Osha kills Sol or defeats Sol, there's going to be kind of this storm around the vergence, this combination of maybe force powers with magic that she didn't know she was able to obtain, maybe something that goes back to the ascension ceremony that brings it back and kind of elevates her power. Maybe this is the same night as the ascension ceremony normally happens, and we get to see Osha finally go through the ceremony, her role in the ceremony be crystallized. And if Mae does die, maybe some of that power that she has, the power of one, becomes the power of two, and we see why they're dynamic, they're split in the Force, how they become two different people that were one reunites. And maybe you hear the mother's voice, Mother Anastaea's voice, and you see Koril reappear, and all these mothers that were there who we don't know if they died or just passed out or died in the fire. We see all of the kind of consequences for all that power of the power of many that comes back, and we finally see what that all means and why it's so important. And hopefully it's given a little bit of weight that makes it a little less goofy from episode 3. So I think those dynamics need to play up. Vernestra is the wild card in this episode because her plotline really doesn't fit this whatsoever. So I can see her kind of coming into this conflict in a couple different ways. If the fan theory is correct that she is the former master of Qimir, I could see her coming into this episode and having a major role in this and setting up a possible season 2 where she takes a more active Jedi role in the plot line of next season. I could also just see her show up at the very end after everything has happened and she just finds the remains of this battle and nobody else is there. She sees Mae dead, she sees Sol dead, and she's like, well, Sol must have done this and this is what happened, and now we have to blame Sol for everything, and it's unfortunate, but we're going back to the Jedi Council and no Sith are involved and everything's all good. So it's going to be one of those two. I really think it's going to be one of those two. I'd kind of prefer her to be part of this conflict just because she's a legacy character that I was was excited to see in the show. I've not really liked the characterization of Vernestra so far in the show, and I would prefer to see her get some redemption, get to see her use the light whip in action instead of just one little cameo for it with a bug. So I'm hoping that she's a part of the conflict. She's a part of a duel where we get to see some really cool dynamics between her and already the impressive lightsaber dueling feats of Qimir. We get to see how he would go up against his former master if that was the actual plotline. I think that would be very cool and another great duel for this show, because although I have not really enjoyed the show, the duels have been very, very strong. And so I think they could make something very cool with a light whip duel in this episode. And on top of that, Mother Koril should come back. There's going to be some way she rejoins the fight. If she's involved with kind of the biology around this, right? She's the one that carries the twins. Maybe she spent her life kind of researching the people who backed Mother Anastasia, the one who helped them get the power to do so, which in my opinion is going to lead to Plagueis. I think anything you do with midichlorians, this show has already dropped, which I don't understand why you don't just say midichlorians. We finally got the word midichlorian a little bit ago in, I believe it's in Bad Batch, and now we have M count again in live action. Just say midichlorians. That's my rant. But outside of that, we've done so much with midichlorians in the show, and Osha and Mae are confirmed to have a very high midichlorian count. When you talk about midichlorians, there really is one person to bring it back to, and that is Plagueis. It wouldn't make sense for the Legends timeline, but I do think this show and Star Wars canon has shown a propensity to age characters up. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to age Plagueis up, as long as we finally get Tenebrous one day in a story. I won't love it, but I'll see what they will do with the story before I really make a true judgment on it. But I think it's going to be Plagueis. He's more iconic. He's the name people recognize. Tenebrous, nobody really knows unless you're a Star Wars fan or you've done research into the Acolyte because you either like it or don't like it and you want to find out more lore and pretend like you really know what you're talking about. Most people don't know Tenebrous unless they've read the Plagueis novel, which is my favorite Star Wars book. So I want to see him, but I don't think it's going to be him. I think it will be Plagueis. And then that will kind of lead into, I think, a connection between Sol and Osha that needs to be solidified. Why is Sol so obsessed over Osha? He sees her from a distance and all of a sudden he's like, that's going to be my Padawan. In a lot of ways, it plays in a really strange dynamic, not just from the way we see it on screen, but there's just kind of this eeriness around the fact that he's so obsessed with her. I mean, he kills the mom because he thinks Mae is Osha, and how does that also play into this story? So I think there's a lot of things that like are here for them to play with character. Do they have any time to do that? I don't think so. I think we're going to get a pretty shallow episode with some cool action and a couple of the plot lines solidified, but I don't know if we'll really go into character here, and that's disappointing because I think a lot of the more interesting character arcs they actually have set up all have a chance to come to a head here. It's 35 minutes. We're not going to really see those things come to a head. But I do think one last prediction for me would be that the stranger Qimir is in a way trying to prove himself to the Sith, to Mother Koril, to all the people involved with this Sith connection. And I think his way possibly is obtaining an acolyte, obtaining an apprentice. It seems to be the one thing he's constantly trying to do. The theory about him being Plagueis's or Tenebrous' apprentice and then trying to gain, an apprentice of his own to kill off Plagueis or Tenebrous and then become the master is a solid one, but I don't think the way he acts here is an indication that he's fully an apprentice of his own. Yes, apprentices in the Sith were able to go off and do their own thing. They didn't always have to be around their master, but he's young enough and doesn't seem proven enough to really be away from his master for this long of a time, to have his own secrets, his own hideouts. I think what they're going to kind of do is the Acolyte, will be twofold. It's going to be Qimir, it's going to be Osha. And in a way, it's going to be setting up a possible season 2 where Osha dethrones Qimir and becomes the next apprentice. It's kind of a battle for that position, and it's going to be led by ultimately the reveal of who the full Sith master is behind the whole thing. I do think it's Plagueis. I hope it's Tenebrous. We'll see what happens in episode 8, but thank you so much for watching our final predictions video of the Acolyte. Again, we'll be back for more predictions for the next Star Wars shows. The next one should be Skeleton Crew, unless we have a surprise announcement coming someday here soon. But Skeleton Crew we will be covering, and of course we have a lot of great content on our channel you should definitely check out, so make sure you subscribe, like the video, comment all your thoughts down below. We will get back to you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will see you all next time.